Hello, welcome back to another episode of Books with Banks. Today I'm going to be ranking all of the novels in the Malazan world that were written by Mr. Ian C. Esslemont. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, really quickly, the Malazan universe consists of a number of series, inside series, prequel series, sequel series, some novellas, one short story, all written by either Stephen Erickson or his friend Ian Cameron Esslemont. Both of them became friends when they were younger, and when they were both on, I believe, when they were anthropologists or archaeologists out on digs. And so today, as I mentioned, I'll be ranking the Esslemont specific novels. I've already done a ranking of all of Erickson's, and that is, I'll put this in the same playlist on my channel as that video. But yeah, so today this will be a ranking of 9 different novels because Mr. Esslemont has one series of 6 books, starting with Knight of Knives, concluding with A Sail. These are called the novels of the Malazan Empire, and they happen sort of concurrently, for the most part, concurrently with the back half of Erickson's Book of the Fallen. And then Esslemont also has a trilogy of prequel books. However, there is a 4th book coming out in this kind of prequel Path to Ascendancy early Empire series. For Book of the Fallen and Novels of the Malazan Empire, those series take place a century or so well after the Empire has been formed, whereas these Path to Ascendancy novels take place much earlier on, around the foundation of the Malazan Empire. Hello again. I always forget to add at the beginning of these videos, this is going to be a spoiler-free review, totally spoiler-free for all things Malazan, anything Erickson's written, anything Esslemont's written. So yeah, please, if you're maybe reading certain series, maybe Book of the Fallen, or maybe the novellas, or Kirkanis, or God Is Not Willing, whatever, and you haven't given Esslemont a try, I would love it if this video might help you to decide whether or not you do want to finally dive into his work. So please enjoy the ranking, and if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Thanks. So, of the 3 books in that prequel series that are currently out, and the 6 novels of the Malazan Empire, here we go. In 9th place, I'm actually going to put the last book in, or that's been published so far, that Mr. Esslemont has written, and this is Kellenved's Reach. Book 3 of Path to Ascendancy. I enjoy the prequel series. I think it gives a lot of interesting, or it sheds light on a lot of those early Empire moments that are only alluded to in the later series, and it really kind of puts a lot of the characters that apparently were around the Emperor and his right-hand man, Dancer, at that time. It puts a lot of their associates kind of at the forefront of this book, when they might just be referenced, or they might just be older and not as central to the later stories. That's kind of what all 3 of these books have been doing up to this point. In this one, we start to get a little background on some of the Crimson Guard characters, who will feature prominently in Esslemont's 6th book, his sort of main 6-book series. And I found this one, as short as it is, I found it pretty... It was a little sparse on explaining and exploring some of the big moments. I had always kind of been wondering how they went down, and when we got to them, it was like, oh, is that really Hall? Is that the... like the... maybe a scene that I had envisioned or been told about by other characters as being this really epic and big moment, in reality was a lot less dramatic, perhaps, or maybe more comical than any of the historians might say later. And on one hand, I think that's interesting, because that definitely does happen. Really simple, kind of like goofy occurrences can get turned into legends and mythologized, sort of. So it's an interesting thing he's trying to do there. However, I do think it does kind of take away a little bit of the drama and take away a little bit of the emotion from, or the emotion from some of the big moments I was looking forward to here. Also, at this point, the second book in the series had started it a bit, but I feel like by this point, there's really a lot of effort put into, like, oh, you remember this guy? Aha! Like giving fans those aha moments of connection, and really just kind of sort of laying all of these Easter eggs, not super subtly throughout. It felt like a bit of a disjointed book. I did also read it pretty quickly, so I definitely do want to go back through and read these 3 books, especially maybe I'll do that leading up to the release of the 4th one, which, if I'm not mistaken, might be coming out sometime next year. And hopefully I'll give it a little more time. I'll try and look a little more deeply, a little more closely at exactly, maybe more specifically, what it was that I just really didn't connect with here, when I really do enjoy the other 2 in this series. But for now, Kellenved's Reach comes in 9th place. Next up, we have Knight of Knives, Esslemont's first novel he wrote as part of this universe, or he had published as part of this universe, and this is, I think, the shortest novel, depending on word count. Maybe could be a novella. I think it passes as novel though, and it's very short, very sweet, super small cast of characters, probably one of the smallest cast of characters in anything Malazan, even maybe smaller than some of the casts in some of Erikson's Valkyrie and Corporal Broach novellas. But I enjoy this book. It's all pretty much in one city. There's an extended kind of flashback sequence in the middle of a soldier remembering sort of fighting alongside a more epic, heroic figure or legendary fighter in a war prior to this. But I do think this book it sets up, this is all going to happen in one night, and it's a night where we know, as Malazan fans, something really important goes down. But here, Esslemont never lets us get too close to that really important event. So when I was reading this, I was a little bit frustrated. And actually, I think I was more invested in that short kind of extended flashback sequence that happens around the middle of the book than I was invested in the story of the novel itself. Even though the atmosphere that Esslemont writes here, it's a very, very terrifying Malaz city that he paints. And I think he might, or the fact that I read this before I read something like Book 6 in Book of the Fallen, The Bone Hunters, which has some moments, or some of the action in that book takes place in the same setting. I think this book does help, did help me, or shape how I envision that city. So I do have to give it some credit. But also, I'm just not I read Malazan because I like big casts and I like more sprawling kind of stories. And this all takes place in one night. Small cast of characters. I mentioned a few of my other kind of issues with it. But yeah, so this unfortunately comes in at 8th place. Next up, we're going to have the 5th book in his main 6-book Novels of the Malazan Empire series, and this is Blood and Bone. This is one of the grimmest, darkest, grittiest books in the entire Malazan world, the entire Malazan canon. It's it gives very like Vietnam jungle warfare type of vibes, and it's a lot of that, and you have to kind of sit with how gross and grimy a lot of the soldiering is through this swampland. This continues by this point, book 5. It continues Esslemont's interest in exploring different regions of the world that Erikson doesn't really touch on. And so we get to kind of take a look at the continent of Jakaruku here, which is cool, especially if you've read the other series. You kind of know some characters that used to rule there, some types of mages, some types of magic that kind of started there, a group of people that might have done something horrible to a god that were there, or that kind of their whole society was there. But then there's kind of just a lot of other characters and other things going on. There is a really kind of dark, humorous storyline in here with this guy who is just this kind of noble asshole sort of guy who is he cracks me up. He just does not understand the desperation of his situation. I mean, he's always like whining and complaining, and obviously he's terrified, but like he just doesn't understand that certain things have to go and like to survive. Like he's just so out of his element, and it's pretty comical, but dark. Again, this is dark. I also should mention I read this right after I finished Crippled God, book 10 in Erickson's series, so I think I was a little bit burned out, and I think maybe I should have waited a little longer to get into this, because I kind of just felt like I was reading a tacked on story that was just something less exciting happening simultaneously to the events at the end of Book of the Fallen. So this one is probably lower than it might be on a reread, just because of the time that I read it, and how kind of burned out I was on the series, or how much I had just, been so overwhelmed emotionally and exhausted by everything I had been reading, Malazan-wise, up to this point. But yeah, so right now, it's in 7th place. We'll see when I eventually get around to rereading these if that moves up or down or not. Next up, we have the second of the prequel novels Esslemont has written. This is Deadhouse Landing, and this one I think has a lot of the pros of the first in this prequel series and a lot of the cons of the third. However, because it has some of those pros of the first, I do rank it a few spots higher than Kellenved's Reach. It still has like kind of that cameos, Easter eggs. Oh, look how cool it is that we're including this scene that you've always wanted to actually see or be in the room for. Look how cool it is that we're all of these different characters that have been alluded to in the main series is like they're all finally meeting up and getting together, and isn't this fun? So yeah, it gets a lot of its fun and energy from kind of relying on the fact that anyone reading this is pretty much going to be a fan of the series. I do think these prequel books are a fantastic starting point, though. If anyone hasn't read Malazan and is curious to start, we haven't talked about the first yet, so I'll talk a little more about starting here and why I might recommend that I'll talk a little more about that when I get to that book in the ranking. But this does have one of my favorite character backstories, and that is Tayshrin's backstory. You get more about, you still don't learn everything we might want to know about Tayshrin, but you get to know more about him here, and I really, really enjoyed that part. I also really enjoyed seeing a young Surly. I was not the biggest fan of, like, Tattersail being in this book, and then, like, just some... Esslemont has one villain character that is in some of Book of the Fallen, but Esslemont, I feel like, tries to, just for some reason, throw one scene with this guy into, like, almost every one of his books, or at least more than half of his books, and I'm not sure why, and he doesn't often do those scenes to, like, add anything to that character. His name starts with a K, just to give a hint if anyone's read these, whereas Erickson, on the other hand, I feel like whenever he writes that character, he's always kind of doing some work to grow the character or to show us to him in a slightly different light. It's kind of always just used in Esslemont's books as kind of an action set piece sort of thing. But yeah, so this book has a little bit of that. Other than that, some really cool Warren journeying stuff, some really cool explorations of the magic system. What is Shadow? What are Kellenved and Dancer up to? How their friendship is really kind of starting to solidify, and how they're growing closer and closer and becoming better and better partners. A lot of that's in here. So that's why I rank it better than 3 other of Esslemont's books, but it is in 6th place. Now in 5th place, right in the middle of the ranking, we have Return of the Crimson Guard, the 2nd book in Esslemont's Novels of the Malaxan Empire series. This might be, if Kellenved's Reach isn't, this might be the messiest book, just in terms of number of narrative threads going on and how, in my opinion, unsatisfyingly some of those are tied up. Some of them are brilliant, but it's sort of like if you throw like 20 darts at a dartboard, some of them are gonna stick. But some of them are just like, okay, I'm not sure why we're doing this. And so by the time you're like done cycling through like the 10th plot line, when you get back to another scene with the first one, you're like, okay, wait, who are these characters? Oh, right, and why do I care? Because I feel like we didn't spend that much time with them before. And which part of the world are they in? Because there is a lot of moving around the world. I believe there's some stuff in the stratum, kind of south, part of the Corel stratum continental kind of landmass. There's some stuff there. There's a lot more on Quantali, and unlike the first book in the series, Night of Knives, which was really just on one city on one island off of the main continent Quantali, this book focuses on a lot of different storylines, as I just mentioned, but they're all, for the most part, all around the Quantali continent. So I thought that was really, really cool, getting to see more of what the Empire's kind of home continent was, the first massive landmass that they did conquer. We also get, I believe this is the first time in the series that we see Li Heng, which is one of my favorite cities. And there's some really cool stuff in Unta, the capital, and yeah, I think that's where I'll leave it. Oh, one more thing about this I'll say. Even though it might read a bit more jumbled than some of Esslemont's other things, this book probably has the biggest impacts outside of itself on like stuff Erickson wrote. So like where a lot of Esslemont stuff can be a little more self-contained, this one really is kind of important to understanding what certain elements of the Empire are up to, while the Bone Hunters and whoever in Erickson's novels are getting up to what they're getting up to. So yeah, that comes in 5th place. Then in 4th place, Assail, Book 6, the final book in Esslemont's Novels of the Malaxan Empire series. This is one of the 4, I should say that about 4 of his novels of the Malaxan Empire series really focus heavily on Crimson Guard characters. I would say Return of the Crimson Guard features a number of them. This one, Book 6, and then Books 3 and 5. 5 was Blood and Bone, which I ranked pretty low. Maybe too low? I don't know. Time to rethink that when I do a reread sometime in the future. But this one is probably, I guess when I think back on this, I think about it as like the adventure novel. Like there are just quests and quests, and there's some interesting environmental stuff here. There's some interesting things you learn about the Crimson Guard's nature, I guess. Some really cool reveals there. Really sad, but really, really captivating stuff. There's also some spooky stuff aboard some ships in this book. There are characters from, let's just say there are characters from Darujasan storylines who feature heavily here, and they are some of my favorites, and I did not expect to see them return, so I enjoyed seeing them pop up here. And their storylines in this book, I think, Esslemont really does a good job at growing those characters and developing them further. So yeah, really, really solid novel. Really focused on exploring, basically at this point in everything that was published, one of the only regions of the entire world the only continent we hadn't actually been to, or neither author had as of yet taken us to. Really exciting stuff like this book. Then in 3rd place, we have Orb Scepter Throne, which is book 4 in Novels of the Malazan Empire. This book weirdly sort of functions as at least as far as the setting goes, as a direct sequel to Erikson's 8th book, which is a little strange because you have both authors writing a lot of similar characters slightly differently. For example, characters like Krupp and Torvald Nam. I think both authors handle Torvald Nam very well. If he wasn't already a favorite character of mine and by the end of 12 the Hounds, and he was, this book would have made him even more of a favorite, and I guess continued my enjoyment of the Torvald Nam character. This book has some interesting storylines with, like, the Moranth people, which was always a pretty cool, or I was always really captivated by that race on the Genebacus continent. This book also has a really fun kind of treasure hunting story that feels like one of the most, like, ripped out of a D&D or a tabletop RPG manual kind of storylines. But it's a ton of fun. Like, he really smartly chose a veteran character to make the main character of that quest. And he, similar to in Assail, how he grows some characters that we were left off with at different points in Erikson's book, here he continues to develop this one character through that treasure hunting kind of quest line. And where they're looking for treasure is really cool, and it makes a lot of sense, but I just hadn't even thought of that as a part of this world. So yeah, I love the Darujhistan setting. I enjoy seeing more happen in this setting after we don't really go back there after book 8 in Book of the Fallen. Yeah, really great book. It comes in at 3rd place though. And in 2nd place we have Dancer's Lament. This is book 1 of his prequel series, and I think he kicked this prequel series off brilliantly. I think this is an amazing starting point if someone wants to get into the series, because the cast is pretty small comparatively, so you don't have to meet too many people. The magic, I think, is sort of introduced a little in less of an overwhelming way, because the main character here, Doran Rav, he is just as confused as we are as readers watching what this guy named Wu is up to, kind of underground, working with kids. Like, what is his deal? Are all of these warrants and the shadow stuff he's talking about? What is even going on here? And then it's forecasted pretty early who Doran and Wu are going to become, and how this kind of friendship starts. It's all in here, and it's really good, and it really kind of contains itself to one city that's under siege, and so you do get some interesting fantasy warfare stuff. You get stuff with kind of a beast that's roaming the plains, and that is either, if you read this first or if you read Return of the Crimson Guard first, you'll get a bit of that kind of thing, which is a cool storyline. And here I think it fits very well. Return of the Crimson Guard was kind of just like another thing, like, okay, here's just yet another storyline that we're having to take care of to kind of understand or flesh out the Quantuli continent. And here, because that beast, that creature, is really important to the lore of Liheng and the setting here, I think it really fits. Also, Doran is one of my favorite characters, and to get his introduction is fantastic. I think Esslemont just totally, by really narrowing his focus, he totally knocked it out of the park with Dancer's Lament. And it was a really close call between this or first place. But I'm gonna put this in second, just because I think Esslemont's best work is Stonewielder, book 3 in Novels of the Malazan Empire. I feel like now, looking back, this is the book that he really was trying to write, with at least books 2 through 6 of this Novels of the Malazan Empire series, where he kind of took us to a continent we had heard a lot about, and took characters that we were maybe a little bit familiar with from Erikson's work, and maybe from the first or second of his novels, and took them to these new places to let them explore these regions along with us, and explore these really cool world building elements. Things like the storm wall is so fascinating. But I think what even propels this book above some of the others for me is this whole idea that yes, they're all in this region, this continent that was at one point conquered by the Empire and still sort of technically is. Those legions, those armies that, and the groups that did that conquering way back when aren't necessarily loyal to the Empire in its current form, and its current way of running its kind of imperialism. And so the Empire kind of has to reconquer what they've already conquered, and there hasn't necessarily been like any successful revolts or rebellions. There, in this book, you have some of that kind of revolutionary sentiment and this kind of rebellion stuff building, and that's a really kind of that's a really fun storyline here as well. But where we just get totally new characters that are totally unique to this book. But yeah, no, that the whole idea of a colonial power or an imperial power holding on to its land grabs, and how disastrous and unfortunate that is for the native people of that region. Also how the soldiers for the Empire feel about that, either the soldiers of the current manifestation of the Empire or those who were just kind of left here way back when it was conquered in the first place and are just kind of waiting around. And yeah, I love this book. I think he achieved everything he was really trying to here, where he might have hit some pitfalls in some of his other books exploring these different regions of the world and continuing on certain character arcs, carrying over those arcs from some of Erikson's books. Stonewielder is my favorite Esslemont book. It comes in at first place. Thank you for watching my video, and let me know in the comments section below if you're a fan of Esslemont's contributions to the Malazan Empire. I know I sure am. I know I really do regret that I kind of gave Erikson such a head start and fell in love with his books first, because I think I'll always prefer what Erikson's written here over what Esslemont has. However, I do really intend to do a reread of all of Esslemont's contributions, just to try and give them a little bit more of a fair pass. You know, try not to read them expecting an Erikson book. Try to read them read them and judge them on their own terms, by what Esslemont's trying to do, not by what Erikson was trying to do. Thank you for watching.